Welcome back to Voluntarist Academy. As always, I'm your host, James Cordiner, voluntaristacademy.com. Go there, check it out. Tonight, oh boy, are we in for a treat. I'm joined by my good friend, Brandon Martin from the S.E.E.D Truth Academy, seedtruth.com. And this guy is just a wealth of just a wellspring of knowledge. And we're going to get into some stuff we don't normally get into at Voluntarist Academy, but it's necessary. It's really enlightening to know the history, like deep history of natural law and the occult and these ancient practices that were pre enlightenment and that really go on to inspire a lot of the enlightened thinkers that come all the way up to the modern day. So, without any further ado, here's my guest, Brandon Martin. Brandon, welcome to Voluntarist Academy. You were a guest a few times on A Hitchhiker's Guide to Truth, but this is the first time you've been here. How are you today?
I'm freaking doing wonderful, and it's awesome to be here with you. It's always such a pleasure to talk to you, James. I've always enjoyed our discussions. We've really laid down a lot of great foundations when it comes to anarchist history and all kinds of, deep, important knowledge that is very relevant to the current condition that we're all suffering under. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about this topic. And it's been a minute since I've done any interviews with a few people. So I figured it'd be great to jump on here with you and discuss something. And I think the topic for tonight will be very revealing for anybody who is interested in peeling the layers back of occultism or symbolism or even just film or, actually getting in touch with some of the cinematography and cinema in general. And obviously, there's a lot of stuff out there that we can learn from. And I feel that this will be, quite intriguing and a great discussion between both of us.
I agree. I definitely agree. A lot of your work does center around film analysis and sort of the allegories that are in film. I guess right off the top of my head, I want to kind of ask you what drew you to that?
Yes, ever since I was a kid, I just really dabbled in the arts, and film was something that was to me a very sophisticated art form. And obviously, as a kid, getting into very, you could say, action movies and thrillers and things like this. So I grew up watching a lot of horror films that probably most kids wouldn't have been able to watch because I grew up in a very adult environment, obviously. So I grew up watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Hellraiser, stuff like that when I was very young, right? And I don't know, it was just the amazing ability to bring forward such intricate details about not only the human experience, but also history, mythology, spirituality, and make it digestible in a visual format. And I feel that everybody is attracted to film at some level. We always have been since it came about, and it's such a beautiful way of being able to reveal deep knowledge, but it also is just a tool, so it can be used to program and mind control people also. But I believe that people get stuck there when it comes to film. And for me, I had the wisdom to distinguish that not all film is just simply a form of mind control being used, even if it is coming from Hollywood. And most of the time, like when people are talking about the mind control stuff, it is specifically, directed at the Hollywood cults and the Hollywood, just mind control techniques that we have coming out of that area. But they fail to understand the history of cinema itself. And this goes all over the world. You go to Japan, you go to France, you go all over Europe, and film is just so rich and vibrant, and it's just so creative, and you can really demonstrate things that you cannot demonstrate in any other kind of media through film. So that also was very interesting to me as a young individual trying to learn more about the world. So I learned a lot about the world by watching movies. In fact, even though I did get to travel a lot of the world too, but I learned a lot about culture and about the human spirit and the human mind. So I could think of like when I was a child, I really liked The Terminator. It's one of my favorite freaking movies. Like that movie is so amazing. And I was watching it because it was, filled with action, and it was, a little bit of gore in it, and it was edgy and things like this, and it had robots and things like that. But as I got older and my consciousness expanded and I went back to that film, I'm like, oh, wow. This movie is extremely deep, and there's a lot of layers to it that James Cameron was bringing forward. And, I talked a lot about James Cameron's movie Aliens with Chris um, from the In Evil podcast. And it's just amazing what you can get from film. So I think if you don't like film, you've either been really sheltered, or there's something broken inside of you that cannot appreciate art form.
I could definitely see myself agreeing with that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a little bit of entertainment,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of good morals to the story, so to speak, that can be learned in these stories. I mean, the stories that we see on the screen at one point in time would have been written in a book. I mean, and they're still written in books, and we should definitely be reading books and expanding our mind that way. But again, nothing wrong with a little entertainment every now and
Yes.
then, especially if it's like a tool to kind of develop more critical thinking skills in the way of like what you do with your film breakdowns and the analogy of the allegories in the films that you discover or outline or expose. um Before we get back to that, because that was kind of an impromptu question to start off, I actually did have a question written down that I kind of wanted to hear what you had to say about, and then we can get back to some of the film stuff, because you just
Okay.
did this presentation over the rainbow, kind of deep diving. Like, the deep end of the pool is like 30 feet deep, and you just went and touched the bottom on the Wizard of Oz. So like that deep dive, I definitely want to pick your brain a little bit more about that presentation. And just for the people listening to this, there'll be a link for that presentation specifically in the show notes. So when this is all over, you guys you gotta go and check this presentation out. Your mind will be blown, like it'll be just blow out of the top of your head. So, anyways, but let's bring it back down to the ground level just for a moment. Um, Brandon, to you, what does it mean to be a 21st century abolitionist?
Oh, well, to me, it means that you are actively involved in fighting against all forms of slavery. And for that to take place, it doesn't just mean, that you're wildly and through some form of neglect or unconsciously just going about some false sense of rebellion, like the SJWs or something like this, right? That you actually have to awaken yourself, empower yourself, educate yourself to not only natural law, but you have to teach yourself how to think and what is the proper method to for finding the truth. So you have to understand philosophy. There's a lot of things that come along with this. So problem solving methodologies, pattern recognition, and that the reason why I say that is because those are things that are going to allow you to apply an effective method for being able to combat the current condition of slavery, because you are literally not only in a physical war, but you are in a war of information. And so this comes down to what kind of media you are consuming, and what kind of media that you are producing. And whenever you're just, nonchalantly, just in a lackadaisical way, just producing media that has no sophistication to it, no scholarship to it, And there's nothing backing that besides buzzwords. And it becomes a form of just entertainment at that point. And I think that that's where a lot of people are stuck with a lot of the work. And so to be an abolitionist is to be actively involved in fighting all forms of slavery. And that mainly is just government, but it doesn't matter what form it takes. It doesn't, it's just slavery in general. That's all it is. You're just out there actively involved in the fight.
Uh, what do you think of this concept? I mean, I don't know if I'm the exact, like, I don't know if I'm exactly the first person to outline this as a concept, but lately I've been thinking about this a lot, that if anarchism is the opposite of slavery, and slavery is a condition under which, living beings find themselves in, then anarchism itself would also therefore be a condition under which people or living things would find themselves in. So it being synonymous, anarchism being synonymous with freedom in this context, uh, the concept is that voluntarism is the action set to get to the finish line, which is the condition of anarchism. So, how do you I don't know, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that it's interesting because this has been on my mind quite a bit here recently, and I've talked about this and I've thought about it for many years. One of the main issues is whenever you're talking to people, and maybe you're not even bringing up the word anarchy or the ideas of anarchism or the philosophy of anarchism or voluntarism or anything like this, you're just talking in general about, getting rid of the current system. And immediately people want to combat that with another system, right? So they're immediately going to start asking you how a system would work. And you can readily recognize right then that that they want control. So if they're asking you to justify your position, not to remove slavery, but to justify why they should support your system, right? Then you immediately know that all they really care about is not removing slavery. They just really care about demeaning what you have to say. They're not really interested in fighting against slavery. All they're interested in is another form of control, if that form of control is feasible for them, which is just another form of slavery. So I always tell people anarchism is not a system. Anarchism, like you said very well, is just a condition, and that condition is the absence of slavery. That's it. And this is the problem because everybody wants to have this idea of, what it is it's scarcity based mind control is really what it is, because people have this scarcity based ideology about safety. So whenever their safety is in scarcity, usually artificial scarcity, then they go into these defensive mechanisms. They get rooted in the R complex of the brain. They go into fight and flight and survival, but they don't realize that the real thing that is threatening their safety, which is destroying their liberties, their rights, their livelihoods, their private property, their autonomy, is actually the current system that they want to, cling on to. They are chained to this ideology. And so they literally have Stockholm syndrome when it comes to this. As soon as you start talking to these people, you'll see readily that they completely identify themselves, eagerly identify themselves with the abuse from the state. And it's no different than any other abuse victim relationship that we see. It's just on a very large scale. That's it. Whenever you look at an abuse victim relationship in a family, you're going to see the same things, the same methods, the same dysfunction play out with you and the state. And people just ignore it. It's just like a female, getting beat by their husband over and over and over. And then he, shows up with flowers and a cake or a cookie or something one night. And then she's like, oh, he's changed, he's good. And then it's a sense of false hope. So I always call it hopium. People are sucking down their own hopium, because they're high on that. And all they care about is really just these little increments of false hope and false, pleasure principles, this hedonistic ideology, just to keep them in that comfort zone. Because really, they don't want to face personal responsibility. And honestly, they don't want to get angry because the righteous indignation has been bred out of them. They don't want to get angry. And if they are getting angry, they're getting angry for the wrong reasons. They're not getting angry about, hey, I'm living in a fucking system of slavery and injustice and, absolute destitute and servitude and it's just, dystopia all around me. They don't really care about that. They care about their football team losing and firing that coach or something like that, because their coach didn't do what they thought they should have done, or oh, they went gambling last night and lost $500 and they got angry about that, or they had some road rage because something that they couldn't control, out in the public world. They get angry about that. They get angry because of the color didn't match the color that they wanted just perfectly. Things that they don't have complete control over. And it really comes down to that. They just want control. They don't really want freedom. They just want control with no responsibility for it. That's it.
It's almost like they're lashing out as if they could be stuck in some perpetual um, spiritual adolescence.
Yeah.
And I mean, because the behavior that you're describing sounds to me like how a toddler behaves when they're going through the motions, and they can't articulate just what it is that the just what it is, the need that isn't being fulfilled. So, you kind of have to start playing a guessing game to figure it out, to soothe them and teach them how to cope and teach them how to push forward. So, like that's what I'm picking up, from what you're putting down. Um, and a lot of your work actually helps grow out of that adolescence, that spiritual or even mental adolescence, because those two things are significantly, and that's even an understatement, tied together: mental and spiritual adolescence. My next question is, of course, and maybe I just answered it, but I'm interested to hear what you're going to say about this. Why is it important, maybe just in your opinion, for people in the freedom movement or anywhere really to understand the ancient occult practices, example such as alchemy?
Yeah, it's a great question. All of my work has circled around de-occulting the ancient mystery schools and mystery traditions. And the main reason why is because that information has intentionally been withheld from us to create a power differential between those who have the knowledge and those who do not. And within those ancient methods, those models, which are pretty much a very, very long, sophisticated way of understanding the natural phenomenon, specifically natural law or cosmic law in creation. And there's a lot of other things that go along with that. And so the occult is simply a tool. It can be used negatively or positively. And I've been saying that since day one, but yet here we are. People still think that the occult is either just witchy woo woo stuff or it's all completely evil and satanic. And that's exactly where the elites and the dark occultists of this world want you, because it keeps you from actually taking an interest in the sophistication of the methods that the ancients held, that would actually, not only preserve things like natural law in their models, but also create a fundamental ability to interpret and get out of this idea of just this materialistic perspective, because the ancient mystery schools, it's all about spiritualism. It's not about materialism in any way, shape, or form. So the occult is something that I always say is probably the most important thing any of us can really study, because we come into this world. This is something I talked about in my most recent series, Beyond the Forbidden Veil. And the idea here is that we're all natural occultists. The universe does not just come out and give us the blueprints of how it works. For example, let's say a tree in your front yard, right? If you want to know how that tree works, you're going to have to study the methods of that tree. You're going to have to study the patterns of that tree. You're going to have to watch it, document it, and see if it repeats the same thing and experiment with that tree to see if it changes depending on what you do with it. And you're going to understand how that tree actually operates by doing this. So if it's an apple tree, right? To get the fruit, the best fruit, you're going to want to understand how that tree works in correlation to the seasons of the year, right? And so, I mean, we all want apples, right? So that is a hidden form of knowledge in reality. It's not occulted intentionally. So it's not like I'm withholding that knowledge because the occult doesn't just mean intentionally hidden. I mean, and here's an example of that. In medicine, they still use the word occult for specific categories of the body. So specific illnesses or categories, they will use that word occult in the medicine industry. So the medical industry. So the idea here is that it doesn't just necessarily mean that it's intentionally hidden. That's part of it, but it's not exclusive to that. So when we apply that to things like a tree, like my example, then we understand that the nature of reality is occulted. And the purpose of that is so that you can grow, learn, and expand consciousness and come to live in harmony with the things around you because they have meaning and purpose as well. And for you to have a pragmatic approach to being able to utilize these resources, because they're all kind of a form of resources, you need to understand that knowledge. And so we're born occultists. Children are very, very good occultists, or even de-occultists, because they are constantly studying everything around them. When they're a baby, they're studying their hands, and all the movements of their whole body is completely occulted to them. Their whole being is occulted to them, and then nature is occulted to them. It's this phenomenon, this thing that is completely unknown. And then they grow and they expand and they understand things better, and then they can live a more fulfilled life because of that. So that's like the basic example of why occultism is so important. But when you start to take it and take it further, then you can start to understand occult history. You can start to understand the sophistication of a cosmic law or natural law or the principles that we should live by that have been withheld specifically to keep us enslaved. And then even beyond that, because it doesn't just stop there, it's just a science. That's all it is. Occultism is just a science. And that's what all occultists have ever done, is try to reveal that science or to interpret that the science from nature itself.
Yeah, like you know, like the modern day, like Mark Passio's Science of Natural Law documentary explains pretty well, some of the occulted information about natural law. I like that you brought that up because I'm sure that we share this opinion that the teachings of natural law and all of its forms, both allegorical and even direct, are probably the most occulted teachings on the face of the planet because of how liberating those teachings are. And I mean, even studies, sciences like alchemy branch off of the discoveries of natural law. I mean, it's a methodology, it's a method to make discoveries of natural law, an ancient method that can still be used today. In fact, what book, if there was one, would you recommend for newcomers to start with in their journey to discovering more about natural law?
I would say the Kybalion is probably the most basic book for individuals to understand natural law. It really does a very, very good job of, yes, I have that exact copy. I got like 3 or 4 copies actually, but yeah, that book right there. And it is revolutionary in the way that it is formatted. and it is just a very easily digestible book that condenses these principles into such a beautiful way, an elegant way of describing them to the reader, so that they can actually make pragmatic use of that and incorporate that into their own lives. When I first read that book, it was as if, you know, it was like my brain just exploded because it just connected everything together. It synchronized all the fragmented knowledge about principles, about the way reality works, about natural law in general, and it just put it all into this beautiful, beautiful model that can be applied. And there's a reason why it's so relevant, especially when it comes to the seven or even the eight Hermetic principles, which Mark has the eighth hidden principle of care within that, which you won't find in the book, The Kybalion. And a lot of people take contention with that. But I do understand why he added that in there, which is synchronistic to a lot of the things that we see in nature, such as, for example, in music, we have the diatonic scale, which is seven notes. And then you go to the eighth note, which is the next octave of the first note. So it would be a higher octave of A. So it's A to G, and then when you get to the eight, it's A again, but it's a higher octave. So you find it in music, you find it in things like the tarot with the 78. The seven and the eight are extremely symbolic. They represent a pure form, at least a more pure form, a more or so once you get to 10 or 11 or 12, you're moving into more complex forms at that point. So we always know, I don't know why, but my mic disconnected and it came back. Sorry about that.
No, no worries. Carry on.
Yes, so I would recommend the Kybalion. And then if you wanted to get into something more along the lines of anarchism or things like that, The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larkin Rose or End All Evil by Jeremy Locke. Those would be two amazing books as well.
Yeah, and there's even not to toot my own horn, but there's some videos on my very own channel that go into mid 19th century abolitionists and who would be modern day anarchists, because that's why I formed that question earlier, Brandon, of that way, because unfortunately we still have this little bit of a problem with the obfuscation of the term anarchism and
Mhm.
anarchist, and what exactly is that thing, and what exactly do these people intend to do. And it's like,
Yeah,
dude,
right.
real anarchists are growing their own food and digging their own wells, and
Yeah,
they're finding alternative medicine, and finding alternative currencies, and maybe forming affinity groups where they can, or co-ops and things like that. They're peace loving people. They're not black bloc brick throwing knuckleheads out
right.
there, really just causing you know what can actually really just be recognized as chaos.
Yep.
Is straightforward. It is chaotic what some of these people that consider themselves anarchists, what they are doing. Um, so
Can I add on to that just a
absolutely,
little
please
brief
do.
thing I just read earlier, which is there was a news article that said, I think it was, yeah, Europe was in complete anarchy because they have all these riots going on over there. And there's like, gangs running around, like knife gangs running around and stalking people and hurting people. And it's a crazy thing. I shared a video earlier on it, but I believe that's what it was called. Europe, Anarchy in Europe, I think is what it was called. And I'm just blown away that, still to this day, people are using it in that kind of context. And it just shows how far behind we really are. I mean, I've been doing this work for I'm almost my whole life, really. I didn't start publishing stuff until the past 15 years, but prior to that, I was still involved with the punk and anarchist communities, and I was actively trying to educate people at some level, even though I was pretty young. This is just horrible. So it's just whack. I can't stand it anymore. So sorry about that, but it's just so fucking disgusting to see that these people are still using this, and it is mind control. It is obfuscation. It is intentionally there to control the definition of the word so people fear freedom. But I don't really care what you call it. You can call it whatever you want. Those are just words. I care about the condition of that, right? And we have to understand a little history. Okay, so with the term anarchy, the first known use of the term anarchy is actually in the Iliad. And a lot of people don't know this from Homer. And it, represented what he was depicting was the idea of, the lack of leadership or lack of rulers or lack of, slave masters in general. And the idea of anarchism arose, and me and you didn't get into this, and I should have talked about this, but it was a contention against theocratic monarchy at the time. So we had this theocratic monarchy taking place and running amok. And so then we have the ideas of anarchism becoming this Greek idealism. And then what happens is that you have the Greek democracy that rises up after the theocratic monarchy, and then you have the contention to that because they recognized the dangers of Greek democracy, which was it was mob rule by the most ignorant, which is what we have today as well. So then they have the republic as a contention for that. But then you have anarchism as the sub bandwidth underneath all these political, regimes that are taking place. And anarchism, took root with, Diogenes, with Epicurus, these great philosophers of that time. A lot of the Stoics took up this idea of anarchism, and a lot of it wasn't a solidified ideology. It was simply a understanding that that authority was illegitimate, pretty much. That coercive hierarchical structures were all illegitimate, and people just wanted to be left alone. So they weren't anarchists in name; they were anarchists by the de facto of their behaviors or by the de facto of their philosophy. And so I thought I would just add that in there because it is a little bit of a interesting, understanding of where that word comes from. And we have to understand that to that, this is also part of this pre-ancient knowledge that there are anarchist philosophies that go back into pre-dynastic Egypt, into Kemet and things like this, but it wasn't called anarchist. They still have the idea of freedom or liberty or sovereignty or autonomy being manifested. And so we have to understand how to follow the ideas through time, despite the differences of the words being used. The words are just the outer layer. And this is where I think people get caught up because they have these semantical argumentations that they want to, die on a hill for. And it's like, okay, you don't like that term. Fine, we can use a different term. I don't care as long as you are on board with ending slavery and not condoning and advocating for or producing and and just doing anything that supports slavery, right? So I just wanted to add that in there a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it goes all the way back to even ancient Sumer.
Mm-hmm.
I went over this a couple weeks ago with the fellows that joined me for the Independence Day special. The earliest known usage of a word for freedom comes from ancient Sumeria, and it's Amarji or Amagi, and it is translates to back to the mother. And they had to invent a word for freedom because some group came along and enslaved them, and they had to figure out a way to identify that which had been taken from them because they did not know slavery. They only knew freedom. So they didn't know that they ever had to even describe this condition of living because that's just how life was. And next thing you know, it's taken. And they're like, what was that thing? We got to figure this out so we don't forget what that was. So we can get back there at some point. That's why it's returning to the mother, And so, and then, of course, through the ages and up through the Renaissance, up through the age of enlightenment, as it was called, I think that is still going on. I think that it's been grossly obfuscated that age of enlightenment or the Renaissance, should end, as if that there's a expiration date on this line of thinking, this philosophical development in the mind and in society, that should end at some point. Oh, we got everything we needed. That's it. No more knowledge. We've got all the knowledge. Forget it. We did the best we could. We We're here. This is it. I don't subscribe to that. I think that there's a lot more that can be discovered. I think we have a good baseline of discoveries of absolute, objective truths as far as human behavior go. But I think that there's a whole lot more to discover out there. We need to return to the mother to
Yeah,
continue
I
that
love that.
discovery, you know? And so it seems to me that a lot of people, even though, back in the day, they called themselves socialists, people like William Godwin
Yes.
and uh, Pierre Proudhon. Uh,
Verdun. Yep.
it seems to me that the socialism that they were describing is not the same socialism as today. This is pre-Marxism, at least in some cases. And so, at least I got to double check on that. Don't quote me on that, but but I'm pretty sure Godwin was around before Marx.
Yeah, he was. Yep.
So, anyways, and people even like Josiah Warren in the United States, these are all abolitionists. They thought that the ruling class needed to be kept in check or even just done away with altogether. But I mean, there's so much going on with this topic, and generation after generation, the development of freedom is stifled, and the obfuscation of these teachings keeps getting worse and worse and worse. They keep using these tragic events to box people in a mindset of fear, and in that mindset, our ability to really understand the world around us tends to shut down. And that's why, at least on this channel and in Brandon's work, you find this we're huge proponents of love and truth, because those are the things that expand consciousness, not limit it. Um, in your presentation, so I want to get back to your presentation.
Yep.
Big, this is how Brandon and I can go. So, in
That's
fact,
great.
it's got me thinking now that we were back on this topic of like the history of anarchism, that what we did on A Hitchhiker's Guide to Truth has to make its way over to Voluntarist Academy.
Mm.
It's like really, it's really good information. So I'm going to make a note right now to like carry that over and to republish it on the channel, and maybe even just, I don't know. I'll get it published, and I'll make sure people can find it in your presentation, over the rainbow. What's the rest of the title, so I don't screw it up?
It is Over the Rainbow, The Secret Doctrine and the Occult Origins of the Wizard of Oz.
I mean, you can't blame a guy for not knowing that off the top of his
Yeah,
head.
yep, yep. Hey, I have
Although,
done so many presentations, sometimes it's hard for me to remember them.
yeah, I don't blame you, dude. I don't blame you.
Yeah.
Really great body of work. This one particularly, really, you know, I think by now the list of people that haven't seen the movie is so short. So like it's just such a classic. Um, and some of the things that you went over about L. Frank Baum uh, were kind of news to me. But I remember seeing at one point this list of people that were, getting taught by H.P. Blavatsky, and I was like, whoa, that's the guy that wrote The Wizard of Oz. That's pretty crazy. There's also some musicians that you might find. It's actually kind of like, kind of stunning. You're like, whoa, wait, what are they doing on this list? Now, in your presentation, I got the impression that H.P. Blavatsky's work is not necessarily, uh, one should not necessarily look at it as dark, occult type magic, like, oh, be scared of that, don't go near that. Is there truth to that?
Yeah, I think that what had happened is this phenomenon during, well, prior and during World War II, where we have a theozoology coming about. And this theozoology takes the idea of mysticism, specifically from Helena Blavatsky, and mixes it with this idea of eugenics to create this, this religious mysticism and scientific, or you could even call it scientism, that was one of the main ideologies of the Third Reich. So it gets wrapped up in this white supremacist ideology, racism, and things like this because of mistranslations and misinterpretations of her work. Now, she did dabble in things that even Baum wasn't completely on board with, such as seances, right? So she did have some form of, horoscopes, seances, kind of pay me for this, pay me for that to keep her stuff going. But overall, after reading most of her work, not all of it, but overall, most of it is simply just about more ancient knowledge that came from Tibet, that most likely came out of Egypt eventually. So this whole idea of Helena Blavatsky, she went to Tibet and then she was enlightened, spending time over there, and that she was initiated into the mystery schools. And so she was bringing the mysteries of the East, specifically the ideas or the eschatology of resurrection, back into the West, where the West had fallen with their eschatology of resurrection. And to clarify on that, I mean the resurrection of the spirit rather than the resurrection of the flesh. So the West was falling into this idea of resurrection, specifically of the flesh, and then she was bringing and trying to merge the Eastern occultism and philosophy and theology back into the West. So she's trying to bring the left and right in together, the left brain, the right brain, the sacred feminine, the sacred masculine back into being, but through the ideas, right? Through the scholarship, through the literature. So a lot of people don't really understand this. A lot of people demonize anything that has to do with the occult. And then if it's being used, for example, if it's being used by the Third Reich, then obviously people will immediately bastardize it, no matter what, without ever looking into it, without ever reading it. And this is a form of emotional mind control, and it's a very good technique to keep people exactly where they're at, so they don't understand any of these things. I have contention with some of Blavatsky's work, but it is very rich, it is very fulfilling, and it takes a lot from, like I said, Tibetianism, Hinduism, Buddhism, things like this, right? The movie and the book differ, obviously, because, Baum had died in 1919, and the movie didn't come out until 1939. And and there was a movie prior to this one, but this is the one that everybody knows. And that's the one that I put in my presentation. But Baum, in his book and in his writings, he actually took contention specifically with divinations. He was not on board with divinations. Now, Blavatsky was really on board with divinations. That's what the seances were about, the predictions of the future and your fortune through tarot reading. I actually look down upon a lot of these ideas of this form of using occult knowledge for divinatory practices. I think it's a very low level. And yes, you can use it for that. I don't think it's a very healthy place to be when it comes to occultism or symbolism in general, or even, let's say, like tarot readings or things like this. I think the main thing that you want to use these things for, and this is what Baum was kind of putting forward as well, which is that you want to use these things to enhance your own consciousness, to become more creative, to expand your consciousness into other dimensions so that you can really have your head in the stars, but feet firmly on the ground, this unification of the spirit and matter together. And he understood that this idea, this kind of woo woo, divinatory fortune telling, like if I can predict what relationship you're going to get into and all that love stuff. And, obviously it's called a fortune. So it gets very materialistic with that. So you can gain money and who you're going to marry and all this stuff. It's nothing that's really going to benefit your overall spiritual progression. So on one level, the idea of divinatory arts did preserve the the esoteric mysteries and the ancient mystery schools and mystery traditions, but on another level, it actually perverted them, maybe not intentionally or, maliciously, but definitely just by means of the necessary need for survival. So as you're traveling as a gypsy, and you want to, survive and you need currency, yeah, do some tarot card readings, right? I totally understand that, but it becomes this stigma that that's all it is, and it limits the perspective of what occultism really is. So my main point is that Baum actually took contention with a lot of that, and he wrote heavily about that, even though he was involved with theosophy and specifically Helena Blavatsky's work.
Yeah, and it comes through when someone, like you makes that presentation, because, it is very striking. I mean, even to me, when and trust me, that's, anyways, it's really striking even to me when, like, I've seen that movie and I have done some work with learning about like natural law and like the balance of the trinity of like thought, emotion, and action. And when I'm listening to you give this presentation, and it starts to dawn on me like, holy shit, the scarecrow, the tin man, the cowardly lion, like that's thought, emotion, and action. The scarecrow needs a brain, the tin man needs a heart, and the cowardly lion needs his courage. And it's like, wow, it's been there right in front of me since I was a little kid. And like the other things that you uh the other things that you explained about Dorothy, and I really appreciated the comparison with all the tarot cards in there, and it just really made a lot of sense, especially when she destroys the Wicked Witch of the West, and you bring up the High Priestess, and you pointed out that Dorothy's wearing the same outfit as the High Priestess, the blue on white, and it's just honestly, Brandon, just like you really were on point with that, dude. And it was just really just like an oh my god moment when that part came up. Um, but you did also mention this term, synchromysticism. Could you please uh, take that from your presentation and bring it to this audience today? What is synchromysticism?
Yeah, synchromysticism is a profound method that I consider to be a method of, you could say, nature, creation, you could call it God, you could call it whatever you like, some intelligent force in the universe. However you look at it, doesn't really matter to me. But from what I understand is the way that I explain it in the film is that it's the powerful reality that synchronistic events that are taking place have mystical properties to them, which are connected to a spiritual prospect. So it's specifically there to help enhance consciousness. And this idea is to bring awareness to the receiver of that information. So it's not usually intentional information being put there by like the artist or the director. So an example of that would be you have an artist who draws a painting or paints a painting, and then in that painting, he doesn't intentionally put a allegory in there about, let's say, anarchism, or let's say has characteristics of a tarot card or something like this. But it is relevant because the meaning is still there, whether he intentionally put it in there or not. And we find this with artists a lot. I've worked with a lot of artists, and you'll see that they are kind of pulling from the archetypal realm, the subconscious realm, right? So they're pulling from this place because creativity is this big, it's this channeling of a force, of an expression of pure consciousness, of pure spirit. And when you're channeling that kind of pureness, you're going to have things that come through that you consciously did not intend on coming through. So as you gain a bigger collective group and they're all working on one project, imagine what you can bring to the table then through synchromistic properties. So Carl Jung talked a lot about synchronicity. This is just another layer on top of synchronicity, which is the idea that underneath that there's an inherent property of meaning that is being directed, maybe not personally, right? It's not like it's personally there. It's for any holistic, intelligent being that can understand that and interpret that, that they gain more purpose and more understanding from that. So when they can use the proper use of pattern recognition and find these hidden meanings within these art pieces or within nature itself, you could consider that to be synchromistic. Now, the idea here is also that it's hard to prove intent with anything, with literature, with movies, unless you know these people personally, but it's always really hard to prove intent. So my whole presentation was to demonstrate as clearly and as concisely as I could that the intent of Baum was to actually inject these themes in there. But I talked about synchromysticism because some of it might be synchromistic. And considering that he was an occultist, he's tapping into the fundamentals of consciousness itself. So another example of that would be like David Lynch. David Lynch is a very abstract filmmaker. And when you watch a lot of his stuff, yes, a lot of it's intentional, but there's a lot of stuff in there that he's not intentionally putting into Twin Peaks or any of his other movies. And well, Twin Peaks was a TV show, but any of his movies. And he did Dune, he did Eraserhead. He's done a lot of great films, and you can see it because David Lynch talked about it himself, but he never, he leaves things up open for interpretation intentionally, but it's also kind of like he didn't really know that was in there until somebody pointed it out to him. And that's the idea with the artist. So whenever you go to an artist and you're like, hey, like, did you see that? And they're like, no, but now I do. It is in there. You realize that there is a multi-layer of factors that's taking place, and that's environmental, upbringing, experiences within their own life, the way their subconscious has been programmed. And underneath all that, there's this pure essence of consciousness that is being channeled through all those filters.
What it seems to me is that, when you study the chakra system, you come to the crown chakra. And that's the gist of that, is that it's an antenna, it's a receiver of information, or how you tap into the greater consciousness of the universe itself. And the universe is sending a sign to somebody who's in the creative zone. And through the crown chakra, they're getting like a download. And it's coming out in their work. And signs and symbols rule the world, This is how it just is. And so I sometimes think of synchromysticism as that kind of wink and nod from the universe, like how synchronicity is usually explained. But synchronicity is more so in, people mistake coincidence for, synchronicity for coincidence. But this is more of an artistic expression. Synchromysticism is more of, I'm taking it as more of an artistic expression rather than a coincidental, quote unquote, coincidental happening. So I don't know. That's my interpretation of what you're laying down. Download of information from the grand consciousness of the universe itself and into somebody who is in the artistic zone. That way the signs and symbols can come through in the art and be put in front of people, because the collective consciousness that we are all a part of will be able to recognize it. And the signs and the symbols, they go in, and the power works. It's just our ability to decipher them, to translate them, and to speak them back out. That's the difference, and that's where people like you come in with your great work, your magnum opus of projects like this, to be able to lay down um, to the definitions and the interpretations, the deciphering, the de-occulting of this information, which you've done brilliantly in this presentation. Now, here's where a little bit of pushback might come, and I want your input on this. You've heard of this term pareidolia. For anyone that hasn't heard of this term pareidolia, uh, the psychiatric definition of pareidolia is the imagined perception of a pattern or meaning where it does not actually exist, as in considering the moon to have human features. Now, there's another definition of pareidolia, which is a psychological phenomenon that causes a person to see patterns in a random stimulus. The etymological definition of pareidolia is from the Greek para, meaning alongside, beyond, irregular, or abnormal, like as in paranoid. And then then it follows with the Greek eidolon, which is eidolon, and that it would be appearance, reflection in water, or a mirror. It also means mental image, apparition, or phantom. And then it ends with ia, which is a suffix that kind of embodies a feminine nature to a word. And so this could mean pareidolia could mean not only these not broad definitions that I've previously said, like a psychiatric or psychological definition, but it could also mean alongside alongside an appearance, or alongside a mental image or apparition or abnormal mental image, or these different combinations of the etymological definitions and the prefixes and the root words and the abdomen of the word. I'm wondering, I mean, to sum this kind of line of thought up, I'm wondering what you would have to say to somebody that would maybe lob the accusation of pareidolia toward a body of work such as your own, because I can see where this psychiatric evaluation or a psychological phenomenon could be used as a weapon to discredit the hard work that goes into finding the information from the ancient teachings of not only like of alchemy, for instance, and applying those and recognizing the patterns, the allegories. And the thing that I really appreciate about your work is like you really in that presentation did do a great job of like outlining, although as briefly as you saw fit, L. Frank Baum's history, and really tying him, and there's proof of this, of tying him to the Theosophical Society, and all of that. So anyways, back to the question, pareidolia, what do you think about this?
Well, I've seen people exhibit pareidolia firsthand, first of all. I'm from Southern Ohio, so there is no absence of meth heads around these areas. And you definitely get paranoia and pareidolia overlapping with these individuals, where they will be finding patterns in rocks that literally do not have any significance at all within that, besides their own personal experience. Um, so for me personally, I think one way is to discern, first of all, a person or an individual who has actually done the due diligence to demonstrate the understanding of this kind of ancient knowledge, and then them also demonstrating the correlations to, let's say, like an artistic piece or a film or something like that. And then also, I think it is a phenomenon, just to be completely blunt and honest here, that a lot of people do see things that are not there. in film and things like this. Absolutely. That's why I did start my presentation out with the idea of like, hey, it's really hard to prove intent, but let's actually look at the history of this guy and show that he actually was an occultist. Now let's look at his writings and see what he was writing. And then let's look at the film that was based off of his writings and see what's in there. So there's all obviously a whole nother layer of intent coming from directors, producers, actors, and things like that. And that can be extremely hard to deal with when you're trying to prove intent. But it's still based off the source material, which is obviously based upon occult teachings of theosophy. And then you go into the actual book, which is in the presentation. I did it kind of in order. And so you go into this book and then you see that the same things that are in the movie are in the book. So it's pretty much undeniable once you start to unravel it and you have a healthy form of pattern recognition. So pattern recognition can be very dangerous if it is unchecked. And that's what I'm talking about with people who kind of exhibit schizophrenia or this pareidolia. Um, it can be a dangerous place because you can actually start to see things that are not there and you have no criteria for evidence. You have no scientific methodology. You're not using the trivium properly. You're using pattern recognition and you're seeing patterns, but you're not filtering that out through some form of correctness, being like, hey, is this actually what I'm seeing? Is that is that the cause of those patterns, right? Is it an intended pattern? Is that the cause? Because just because two things line up doesn't mean that the cause is the actual reason why that's lining up, right? So you could have two events taking place simultaneously, doesn't mean that they have the same causality to them. This is a thing that happens with people who are trying to diagnose themselves with illnesses and things like this. They have two compounding issues. It doesn't, and they have similar relationships, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that the causal factor of that is the result of those two issues that are taking place. It could be two different causes because of those two different issues. This is why, you have to be very thorough with your research. You have to be very thorough when it comes to looking at the signs and symbols that are being placed out there. So, as an example, here's another example. Maybe you see the all seeing eye on somebody's hat, right? And then you see somebody that's actually part of a secret society with the all seeing eye in a book or something like this. Just because that person has the all seeing eye doesn't necessarily mean that they're part of that secret society. We see this with the the run amok and out of balance conspiratard movements that are going on. Not that I am not a conspiracy person myself, because conspiracies are real, but it is important to understand that it has been taken and weaponized and used as a psyops. And because of our own ineptitude, because we haven't been taught or we haven't taught ourselves how to use these skills and how to discipline our mental faculties, then you have people with running amok with the run amok imagination is pretty much what it is, and then you add a layer of anxiety and fear and paranoia to that, and then everybody is the enemy, right? So it doesn't matter. You have the all-seeing eye on your hat, you're the fucking enemy. So I would describe that as a form of that lack of filter for pattern recognition. So I think that there's just methods that can enhance your ability to become more clear and become more accurate with your pattern recognitions. And I hope that I have exhibited that and demonstrated that through the fruits of my labor, obviously, in my work. And I think I have. I think I've done a really good job at that with most of my work. I've had people think that I was, crazy because of the symbolism that I was pointing out in film and stuff like this, and I've even checked myself. I've been like, many times I'm like, is that actually what I'm thinking? I got to put it through this filter of like, hey, I need to check this work and make sure it actually lines up and it's accurate before I go producing any of this work. So it is a dangerous phenomenon, that's for sure. But I do see that this could be used, as you said, as a weapon against people who are using correct pattern recognition and bringing to the table actual knowledge that can enhance other people's lives. And I mean, who doesn't like Easter eggs in film, anyways? I mean, Easter eggs are a cult. That is what occultism is. And you think they chose the Easter egg just randomly? No, they didn't choose the Easter egg randomly. It is an occult symbol. It is a very occult symbol. And then we just run around, like, especially new age kids who are just running around in video games, like trying to discover all the Easter eggs. They have no idea what they're really doing, which is a method of de-occulting hidden information. And so we're being shoved in the face with all this stuff, and people just don't get it. And I think film, this is why I like film so much, because when you talk to somebody and you reveal some of these things and they actually listen to you, they really, really pay attention. They're really receptive, and it's a film they really love. They come back after they watch the film again and they're just blown away. And they're like, wow, I never knew this stuff was in this. And it enhanced their life, their experience. And then at some level, it's taking them closer to being a personal, responsible individual for themselves, and a person that actually wants to get involved with the movement of ending slavery. I've seen it time and time again where, you start talking about movies that are fighting against, in the movie, the narrative and the theme is fighting against dystopia and fighting against authoritarianism, Hunger Games, all this stuff, whatever it might be. And you talk to people about it and you're always asking, like, well, you like the heroes in this, right? Why aren't you stepping up and exhibiting these archetypal expressions of these heroes yourself? Why aren't you expressing this in your own life? Because you are living in that condition, And I see people time and time again be like, you're right. Like this, this is something that we have to really face. But it takes a keen mind. It takes someone who doesn't have the rose colored glasses on, they got to take the rose colored glasses off, and it's uncomfortable. It's extremely uncomfortable when you start to see the world for what it really is. But then there's a lot of beauty in the world as well. It's really society that's all crap. That's the real problem, is what human beings have created. It's not really the world. The world is actually gorgeous, and it gives us all the opportunities that we need. This universe is giving us all the opportunities we need to turn this around. And are we going to answer that call? That's up to us collectively. I don't know if we will. I think we can. I definitely think we can. And I think symbols are one way that we can do that. And one reason, not to continue to rant on here, but the one reason why I do find symbolism very important is because not only does nature speak in the language of symbol, but symbols are such a profound cultural phenomenon throughout all ages. And we use them constantly, whether you're a mathematician, an English professor. Oh, I can't even speak now, but English professor. It doesn't, you don't just not look at symbols. They're everywhere, And for example, here's a good example. So mathematicians think that symbols are pretty meaningless for most part because it's a right brain aspect, and they're very, very left brain. But then you start talking to them about the shape of the number 1 and 2, and then the equation, the equations that they're using, the symbols for the equation that they're using. And they're like, wow, I actually am using symbolic literacy at some level to get to these answers for my equation. And this is how I get to people in the left brain with symbolism. I'm like, look, you're using a language of symbols to explain something of a phenomenon of nature. And so you're an occultist at some level. It's very sophisticated occultism when it comes to that. But you're in an imbalance because you're not embracing that other side, and you're not really, enhancing the quality of the knowledge that you could bring to the table. But also the other thing is that symbolism can connect us to our origins. And that's very, very vital, because one of the things that they use against us in mind control is symbolism. And I mean, if you take marketing classes, if you go to, I'm sure if you get into some military film, production or something like this. There's going to be a lot of mind control tactics being used through subversive use of symbolism. So the more aware of that you are, the more aware of that you can become, the less it has an effect on you. So pretty much it's a security measure. It's a firewall against subliminal use of symbolism, but that's only one layer. Like I said, there's a big plethora and eclectic variety of beautiful, rich information beyond just how we're using it.
Well, that's a beautiful way to wrap this up, Brandon. I'm super thrilled that you were here. Do you have a closing remark that you would like to share with the audience?
I got the internet gremlins going, or the tech gremlins going on. Yeah, my closing remark would be don't give up. Freedom is worth fighting for, and educate yourself. Become autodidactic. Find a passion, whatever it is, music, the arts, cinema, doesn't matter. Find a passion, find a good hobby, and dig into it. Don't just lazily look into it. Don't just take little snips of it or little slices of it. Fully flush it out. Leave no stone unturned. Find a passion and really get into it. And make sure to share that with other people. Publish something or talk to other people about it because it's very crucial, especially when it comes to slavery. So if you find any value in any of this work, you can check out my work at seedtruth.com. There's a lot of stuff on there. I write a lot of articles about film. I write a lot of articles about psychology, about freedom, about liberty. I did a great video on my new breakdown of my document called the Declaration of Abolition, which was just spectacular. I think it's one of the most well-written documents that I've ever read, honestly. And so I would highly recommend checking that out if you're freedom oriented. But yeah, other than that, thank you, James, for allowing me to come on here and talk on this great topic. Nobody's asked me to come and talk about the Wizard of Oz yet, so I was really excited to talk about it. And there's just so much. Like I barely touched the top layer of what's in that film. I just kind of built the foundation. And the last thing I would like to say is that Mark Passio did an amazing job at making a presentation. I think it was back in 2013 or something when he did that presentation. Everything I needed to know, I learned from The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. And that is the complementary, mine is the complementary piece to his work. So watch that too, and then come to mine and check it out because they both feed off of each other. And I built on the foundations that he laid. And I was just trying to bring more knowledge, more rich knowledge to that amazing piece of work that Baum put out for all of us to learn from.
Always really good to give the old tip of the cap to those who came before. Very gracious of you to recognize Mark's work and the impact that it's had on you to take it upon yourself to make a sequel. Make a little continuation. Like that's the goal. It's to build upon. Stand on the shoulder of giants so you can become a giant and have someone stand on your shoulders. Pass down the legacy, the torch, pass it down. So it's just a big relay race, folks. That's all it really is. Out there and what do you want to do to win the race? Like, you know what I mean? You want to step on other people? Or do you want to I don't know. We can all win together, at least in this game. That's the goal. That should be the goal. Freedom over slavery, love over fear. Yeah. So, yeah, you guys got to go check out Brandon Martin's work. Incredible work he's done over the years. It's truly impactful and inspiring. So, as we leave this evening, one last thank you to Brandon Martin for showing up as as a friend, as a peer, as a scholar, and all around great guy. It's very important that these discussions happen, and I'm very honored to be able to have this discussion with Brandon tonight. And as always, well, first of all, I want to address that the website is indeed back up. Go to voluntaristacademy.com and check out what's going on over there. If there's somebody in the audience that would like to volunteer their time to help me, to help me expand, my reach, that would be great. I'm having a little bit of trouble managing my time. I got a lot going on. The job is basically just uploading videos to other platforms. That'd be great. You can email me if this is something that you can find time to do, and that'd be great. Then what else is there? Obviously, there's the opportunity to come into the memberships where we can hang out, and the Discord server is up and running, and we can all hang out and get to know each other. Part of the trouble with this philosophy and changing life, and it can lead you to a lonely place. And I want to provide a service to people where you don't have to be lonely. You do not have to feel alone. We can definitely come together and share ideas about voluntarism, some of the topics that are covered on the channel, and some of even the deeper topics that maybe I don't know enough about yet, and you could help me learn. I'm willing to learn myself. Then I think last but certainly not least, check out Autonomy, Richard Grove's course, and that can help you not only change your own mind for yourself, complete paradigm shift in your mental capacities, and to get out of the scarcity mindset into one of abundance, and see all the possibilities that you could have in your life to really have personal autonomy in the world. You should check that out. There's a link in the show notes for that. It is an affiliate link. They're not a sponsor. I do have an affiliate link because I am an autonomy graduate, and that's what we get when we graduate. We get affiliate links. So if you enroll by using my link, you're helping me out. And then all the music for Voluntarist Academy is provided by the great Brendan Daniel. Go to his Instagram page and check out his folk music. It's truly moving. I really love his music. It makes you think, and he's got a great voice, and he's got great guitar skills and harmonica skills. And he came by the house one day and recorded music right here in the studio for me to use on this channel. Then, as I always like to send you guys off, just remember one thing on your way out: that you own yourself, period. No one else owns you, and you are not a slave. If you are here listening to Voluntarist Academy, you are in fact a prisoner. And the difference between a prisoner and a slave is the prisoners are trying to get off the plantation. So indeed, this is the end. Thank you very much for tuning in. I love you all, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.